session. And as you can see in all the announcements and also on my screen, we have one of those interesting topics where we take on something that has existed for long, Python, Microsoft Fabric, but then we merge it with what's the latest, what you can use to unlock more value, MCP server. And we have a veteran. I'm going to show his profile, but I tell you, he's someone who you want to listen to. So this is the part where I am walking through the introduction. I will be quick with it. And Alexander is going to have, I think he's willing to give us more than 1 hour. So I'll just say up until whenever he's tired of us and our questions, and then we end the session. So he's a professional consultant and a certified Microsoft Fabric data engineer. He's someone who has worked in different aspects of the entire data platform. Let me put it that way, because things have morphed in the decades, right? I'm going to share. It's okay with me sharing your LinkedIn in the comments, right? In case people want to connect with you. Okay, great.
Yep.
So I'll share his LinkedIn so you can connect more with him. But right now, I'm going to get out of the way and let him do what is prepared for us. So Alexander, thank you, and over to you. I've stopped sharing my screen. I'm going to go off camera, but I'll be in the chat, making sure that I let people know you will answer their questions at the end. Thank you.
Right. So, good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming today. It's late at night, and obviously it's Monday, which is even harder. And I appreciate that you take time and you take interest in listening to what I have to say. I'm just gonna start sharing my screen, and I will start from PowerPoint. So I'm sure I don't want to lose my context at this point. Let's see how it goes. And okay. Sharing the screen here. Right. Hope you all see my screen at this point. Michael, can you confirm?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Perfect. Sounds good. All right. Well, title says it all. We are going to be looking at how we build the MCP server in VS Code for Microsoft Fabric. And I will be using these tools. You know, if you want to use the LinkedIn, this QR code on the screen right now, it points to my LinkedIn profile. Feel free to take a screenshot if you'd like, or it will appear later as well somewhere. Sorry, my mic was muted. I'm not sure if I missed anything about the first slide, but Michael already introduced me, so I'm not going to repeat much. I'm a consultant. I have very diverse experience. I am working with Microsoft Fabric because this is my current interest, and I'm just obsessed with it. And let's just get to the topic right away. So we all aware this presentation is based on the code that is public on GitHub. The project is called Fabric MCP. And this is the QR code that points to this exact URL. If you're interested to explore code later by yourself, you absolutely can. It's totally free. There's no walls. There's nothing there that would stop you from that. So go ahead and just download that code and try to build it yourself if you wish. It should work. Now, why I want to talk to you about all that things? Well, first of all, when we work with data, and my background comes from developing application coding and programming in different languages for a very long period of time. So I prefer code first. Now, while Fabric user interface, it's browser-based and it's great on itself, but VS Code may be familiar and may be more advanced when it comes to coding experience. And, in Fabric, when we work with data, we usually assume two most important coding experiences. One would be the SQL language with queries and everything, and another would be the Python when we work in notebooks with Fabric. And at the same time, when we are in VS Code, we should use the modern tools, one of which is GitHub Copilot. And again, if you're working in Fabric, you may be equipped with the Copilot built in, but the experience in Fabric is not the same as the experience with the GitHub. However powerful GitHub Copilot is, it doesn't know anything about Fabric and your data. That's one thing. Another thing is that when you're working remotely, right, you need to work with Fabric. You don't have access to your user interface anymore. So you need to get access to Fabric APIs. It's not easy. So we want to maybe hide this kind of uneasy part of the experience because we want to focus on the development itself. And there is a tool that allows us to do just that. It's called MCP, which stands for Model Context Protocol, and we'll talk about it quickly a little bit later. But that's exactly the tool that would give us the ability to bridge the gap between our VS Code and Copilot and our Microsoft Fabric environment. So what we're going to do, we're going to build that MCP server to make sure that our GitHub Copilot can help us to the fullest. We're not hindered with any specific walls or issues between two different systems. What is MCP? Well, I assume that I should give you this information because we didn't specifically say, look, whoever comes to this session must know everything about this thing. Absolutely not. Now, MCP stands for Model Context Protocol. This is a communication protocol for machine-to-machine communication. It's not for humans. And it exists specifically to allow connection between different kind of systems. Computer systems. What systems specifically, right? And this is the original diagram from Model Context Protocol official website where they have documentation that you can explore further on your own time. But essentially, MCP is a standard at this point in AI-driven technologies, and it allows AI applications on the left. In our case, we will use the GitHub Copilot to communicate with everything else on the right, specifically data sources and different APIs and different tools. So that's why we are going to be using this, because it's a standard. That's the way how we can make our GitHub Copilot to talk to Fabric. However, Fabric out of the box doesn't have support for MCP. Well, specifically in the experience that we're talking about. So let's take a quick look what exactly we're going to be doing. So we have our local computer. So, and this is what we will just look at. It's a diagram of the architecture that we will be implementing. We have our local computer. And on this computer, we Right. Sorry about that. I keep turning off my microphone just accidentally because it reacts on the space, the same space button that I use to switch between the slides. And that's why, sorry about that again. Right. So we have local computer. On that local computer, we have VS Code with the GitHub Copilot. So what does GitHub Copilot do? Well, it obviously talks to the LLMs, which are large language models. And at the same time, VS Code as an application, it is an MCP host application. What that means is that it has a built-in MCP client. And remember, MCP in this context is the Model Context Protocol. So it's that communication layer between the Visual Studio Code and the LLMs that GitHub Copilot can use. Now, it doesn't do anything if there's no anything on the other side, right? So, but we have Fabric. And in Fabric, we want to explore things. We have different objects. So to achieve, to bridge, this is a gap, right? That's what we're bridging. Now, how we do this? Like we add the MCP server to this picture. So the MCP server can talk to Visual Studio Code through the MCP protocol. And GitHub Copilot understands that communication. At the same time, MCP server will be talking to Microsoft Fabric using specific API calls, using specific interfaces that Microsoft Fabric enables for external applications. So that's the picture. That's what we're doing here. Now, how we want to do this, that's exactly the question, because this is our scenario. Obviously, we need to connect to Microsoft Fabric. And what that means essentially is that MCP server is an application. So we are building an application and we're writing code for that. And application needs to connect to Microsoft Fabric on behalf of the user that will be working with the Microsoft Fabric resources. In today's scenario, that would be me. I will be connecting to Microsoft Fabric using my account, right? So we need authentication. That's the step number one in our workflow. And when we start the demo, you will see that this is an important step, because without that, there will be no connection whatsoever. Now, what happens next is, if you're not familiar, in Microsoft Fabric, all the resources are allocated inside workspaces. So we want to know which workspaces a user wants they log in. Which workspaces do they have access? So the next step, so how we can achieve that by using Microsoft Fabric REST API and using the user credentials that we acquired in the first step, and when we're connecting to the Fabric. What we're going to do next, once we have the list of the workspaces, we want to pick a specific workspace, and we want to see, because we want to work with data. Now, we want to see what types of data we're dealing with in these workspaces. And for that, we'll be again using Fabric REST API with user credentials. And why we're always using the user credentials? Well, two reasons. Number one, we don't have any other credentials. That's simple, right? That's the only choice that we have. But why wouldn't we have any other credentials? Well, because it's a security concern. Now, we only can allow user to see the data that they have been given access to by their Fabric administrators. So that's why we're using the user credentials. Once we discover analytical stores, next step for us is to understand the data structure. I call it a data schema, just using a familiar language for data engineers. When we work with the databases, we usually organize resources like tables, views, and whatnot into what's called a schema. But essentially, it covers each and every object in our data sources that we know it's the data structure. And for that, we'll be using a slightly different mechanism. We'll be not using the REST API, but we will be using the SQL endpoints. What that means and why? To discover the schema, well, each and every analytical store in Microsoft Fabric is automatically equipped with the SQL endpoint. What is the SQL endpoint? If you've ever worked with tools like SQL Server Management Studio, well, it's a connection string. That's simple as that. SQL endpoint, essentially, it's a connection string for when we want to run the SQL query remotely against those data sources. Again, we only can use user credentials here. And the last but not least, because this is actually the whole point of this entire workflow, we want to generate custom queries that work, and they return proper data to us. And custom queries, this is where the power of GitHub Copilot will come into play. And that's exactly where we will be seeing immediate help. What's going on in here? Yeah, that's exactly where we will be seeing immediate help. And the whole workflow will lead us to that point. Now, so at this point, we know what we're going to do. At this point, we understand the steps that we will be taking, how we will be using this. So the next is how we're going to achieve that all. We need to do this workflow. We need to do this everything. So basically, we will build an application. Application using the Python language. The application will be will not have any user interface, because the whole point of this application is to talk to the Microsoft Fabric using human language in GitHub Copilot chat window. So we don't really need any user interface at all. And to achieve that task, because I've chosen to use the Python language, the reason for that being is that if you're in a Fabric ecosystem, the two most supported languages there are SQL or SQL and Python, because Python is the primary language in when working with the Spark cluster, which is behind the Fabric notebooks. And that is a natural way to work with data stored in the lakehouse architecture. There's a library for Python just because of the language choice. I could have chosen a different language. I could have chosen a different way to develop the MCP server, but I decided to stick to the languages that would most likely be in the skill set of any data engineering team at this point that is working with Microsoft Fabric. So Python ecosystem offers us an absolutely great tool. It's relatively new as the MCP itself. If you don't know from history, MCP protocol was introduced in 2024. Very short time right after that, the MCP FastMCP library was started as a project on a GitHub. And at this point, it's a full framework that provides a complete toolkit for everything MCP and more. It's really easy to start with, and it's really easy to use. Now, you can explore that framework yourself. There is a GitHub URL here on the screen. And why I will be using this library and why I'm talking about it. First of all, I will not spend a lot of time on this library at all, because we will use it very briefly, and you will see that it's the outer layer of our application architecture, but it allows us to very quickly implement standard-based production-ready MCP server. So we don't want to spend our time on boilerplate because we want to focus on our business logic. If you remember that workflow, right? I don't want to do this because of the animations, but we can look later at 5-step workflow. So we want to just focus on our business logic. So the entire MCP server outer layer implemented with the FastMCP library will be inside a single file, main py, and that file will have no business logic in it whatsoever. So we will briefly look at it, but you will realize that there is nothing there really to look at, and thanks to the FastMCP library for that. We will use a very simple technique to give our LLM through the Copilot a complete description of the tools that are at the Copilot disposal inside our MCP server. That's what MCP server does. It exposes the tools that LLM can use to create the context, right? And in this case, FastMCP allows us to use the standard Python docstring. So we don't need to write any code. Docstring is a comment. We write the comment, and that's enough for us to describe what this tool will do. And of course, the last but not least, it's really fast to start with and simple to use. And this is just a screenshot that from the code. We'll look at the code live. Here's just for illustration. You see that I hope you can read Python, but if you cannot, that's not a big deal because it's very logically simple to understand. Use it as a pseudocode, if you will, right? So we load the FastMCP library. We import the Fabric MCP service, which is our code. It's the code that we will develop. And then we initialize our FastMCP server, and we will give it a name. And that's essentially all to it. Any tool that we create, for example, a tool that we call a list workspaces that will give us all the workspaces that we can see in Fabric, it will call our service. This is our code. So there is no more, right? So there's only, for the tool code, there's only one line of code. That's it. That's what Fabric MCP does for us in this case. And that's it for this quick introduction to what we're going to do. And next, I'm switching to my Visual Studio screen. Michael, if you can confirm that we're seeing the screen, Visual Studio?
Yes, yes,
okay,
we do.
Perfect. All right, so I'll remove all the distraction from the screen here, move stuff from here. Now let's look at the code. This is exactly what we're here for. How am I doing on time? I think we're good.
All yeah, right. We're good.
Right. I don't want to, but I'm just curious. If you guys can just do a quick show of hands, who knows how to work in Visual Studio Code in general, who knows the structure of the panels, like the list of the files and Copilot. Perfect. I see. Yeah. I see your hands. Great. I'm really glad. Thank you so much for that. Let's just look at the project. So you see it's really simple here, right? So as I said, we have the main py file. That's what we will work with. That's what we will start. And as I explained before, it has our docstring comments. We're not going to read through this right now because, as I said, all this code is available on GitHub, and I'll show you where to get it. We'll do the quick through, and we have MCP tools. Now, at this point, we have 7 of them. And we will explore most of them. Most likely, we will not look at the last one, but that should be just fine. But you see, as I explained, in main Python file, there is nothing but instantiate FastMCP server, instantiate our own business logic, right? Define the tools, and then start. MCP run, all to it. That's it. Now, the question here is this. How do we actually run the MCP server in Visual Studio Code? Well, if you have that code, you should be able to clone it, and you will have exactly the same thing on the screen, and you will want to know how can you run it, right? It's really easy because you don't need to use the command line. You can. Obviously, you can use the command Python and main.py and run it manually, but you don't really need to because Visual Studio Code comes with the standard way of supporting the MCP server in it. Only thing that you need to do, you need to create the mcp.json file. And you can define as many MCP servers here that you can run in simultaneously or one at a time. It's up to you. In this specific project, I specifically put this mcp.json file into a Git repository. So when you clone the code, you will have that definition, by the way. Now, what it says here is this. I'm using the virtual environment based on Conda project, or you may have heard of it as an Anaconda project. The reason for that is very simple, and I will just do a very quick detour to show you why you want to do the same. But if you don't use the virtual environment, that's not a big deal at all, because in this command, you just replace the location for your python.exe file, and that's it. Now, a quick detour from here is that there is a docs folder that has some documentation. And if you start from the beginning of it and go through it, you will get yourself familiar with what exactly is happening here and how to quickly start with this coding. And this documentation is part of this project. It's every single time when the code is updated, documentation is updated the same way. We're not going to go through this documentation again, only through this diagram a little bit later. And there are additional files that explain everything. But of course, what you will see first is your main README file, as it is a habit for any Visual Studio project. And it explains the requirements. This is a recommended approach, but that's not a mandatory approach. What's mandatory is that you have other things that are not marked as optional. And that's pretty much all to it that you need to know to start with. There is a simple setup, and there are commands that you can run and you can go through yourself. But the main reason why I'm using Conda, because there are other ways of using Python virtual environments. The reason why I'm using Conda is because it's a prerequisite for Fabric data engineering extension. I'll show you what it says. Let's quickly filter that. Microsoft Fabric Data Engineer, right? So this is the extension that would allow you to do the remote development of the Spark notebooks that would run on Microsoft Fabric Spark cluster in your remote environment in Fabric, but you will work them locally in your Visual Studio Code. And this extension is based on using there's a quick setup guide, and it requires that you install Conda. So if you want to do any remote development with Microsoft Fabric, I strongly recommend that you install that extension. And you will have to install, using this quick setup guide, you will have to install your Conda environment. That's why it will be natural for you to then later expand your capabilities there and continue using this Conda environment for this MCP server. At this point, we looked at the main PI. We know what it does. I started explaining how we run the MCP server through the MCP.json file. And you can see that right here, I have the start, I have the tools, and I have more, right? So this is the simplest way to work with the MCP server. Now, of course, there's more ways. For example, if you click on the extensions and you look here at the MCP servers, this list will be read from this exact JSON file. And it's already here. And you can use this UI. You don't need to keep the file open, because if you click on this gear item, what you can do similar stuff. You can click the start server. You can see the output. You can change the configuration. And everything that VS Code allows you to do, you can do from here. I prefer to keep my mcp.json file open, specifically when I develop that project. It just makes it a little bit easier. And that's all about how we can start. And we will start it very soon. Now, I have to stop talking about the code and start showing you how it works no later than after the next 10 minutes. Michael, if you can just kindly help me watch this time, I would appreciate it.
Okay, noted.
All right. So no more than 10 minutes for the next stuff, right? Okay, let's look at what we're doing here. Our application starts from the main PI, right? Now, it has the MCP layer on top of it, which is the endpoint that will be exposed automatically to the GitHub Copilot when we start this application. And as you have seen, we delegate all the business logic from here to our code that sits inside the Fabric MCP service. This is a single Python class that defines all the logic that is incorporated into individual tools. We will take a look at a few of them just so we understand what's going on in here, right? Remember our workflow, we start from communication. So we want to implement the authentication provider for that. Now, we support at this point two different modes of authentication. One mode is called the user mode, and another, or interactive mode, if you wish. And another is the service principal mode. Service principal mode requires an additional setup on Azure. We're not going to explore it. We're not going to explore it today for the main reason that it's intended for automation scenarios only. When we have a user talking to Microsoft Fabric using the chat, we shouldn't be using service principal mode, because service principal will have a completely different security context. What that means is that it will have visibilities assigned to it on workspaces, specific objects inside the workspace assigned to it by Fabric administrator. It will not be a user context. That's why we're not going to support it, explore it here, but it's in the code. So if later, while this project develops, we discovered the automation scenarios when it's useful for us to run the MCP server with the agent without any human interaction. We can use the service principal authentication mode. It's already in the code. What happens is that this authentication provider acquires the security token using credentials, and it caches them inside the code. So when any of these tools access specific Microsoft Fabric endpoints, like, for example, the Fabric REST API or Fabric SQL endpoint, they use this token. So they ask provider, hey, give us the token for this user so we can communicate with Microsoft Fabric and get your data back. And that's pretty much all to it. So we have two additional, so as I mentioned, we have main service, we have our authentication provider, then we have our Fabric REST API client, and we have our Fabric SQL client. Now, keep in mind that this is a Python environment, and therefore connecting to SQL may not be very straightforward from the Python compared to other languages. For example, if it was a language from Microsoft ecosystem, something like a C# on .NET, then we wouldn't have any problems at all because it's all kind of very easy to do in there. In Fabric, there is a specific package. In Python, there is a specific package that I've chosen to use to connect to the SQL endpoint in Fabric for one specific reason. First, this package must support the standard Microsoft driver. And second, it must support Microsoft Entra-based authentication for users. Now, a little bit of a deviation from our scope, just for you to remember, Microsoft Fabric does not have a built-in SSO or single sign-on with any other authentication systems but Microsoft Entra. Microsoft Entra is the catalog that is used for any work email that is built on the Outlook. So that's the standard authentication way for Microsoft ecosystem, and we absolutely must have the Python library that supports that way of authentication. That said, it doesn't mean that we cannot use other clients. We may be able to in different situations, but at this point, this implementation specifically focuses on that scenario. Now, at this point, let's do a quick walkthrough through the code. Right, this is our service, and as I said, it's a single class, Fabric Micro MCP service, and it has the methods that we call from our tools. For example, list workspaces, right? It has the docstring description, like fetch all accessible Fabric workspaces via REST API. And you will find this kind of documentation all across the code everywhere. So any code that you will find here will be supplied with this docstring comments that will explain what's going on in here. In this case, we're using the Fabric REST API client, which is our code. Let me show you. We have Fabric API client and Fabric SQL client that we import from these files, right? And when we instantiate our class in the constructor here, right, we create our client for API and we create our client for the SQL. And then we call them. And that's pretty much all to it. So when we know that we're calling a specific API endpoint, in this case, it's workspaces, that's what we need to do. And that's how we return the information back to our GitHub Copilot, to our model. This is a tested approach, so you can just use that. It works. And you will find that for every tool, you will need a similarly named method in the service. So if we're working on expanding the list of tools, we're creating something that is not there, but we want to have it, then we can create a tool in the main pie. That's our development process, right? We add a MCP tool here with the decorator, and we define what it will do. And this is extremely important. We don't have to implement the code. We absolutely must start from this doc string. If we didn't define the doc string, most likely Copilot and LLM won't be able to use this tool because they will not understand the scope of its usability. So it's very important for it. Continuing here in the service, as I explained, sometimes we just call our Fabric API. But in cases when we use the SQL, obviously we need to generate the query, right? And then we use the SQL client to execute that query. All the queries are parameterized, so we need to be very clear on the security of this implementation. And again, I'm not going into the details of the code implementation itself. If there is interest, we can always allocate completely separate times just talking about this project on itself. But for the scope of today's meeting, that's not really important. And we have these two files. One is the SQL client. It's a class, again, and we implement how we get connection string, how Michael showing me that I'm done with the code walkthrough. And this is totally fine because I'm literally done. And this is our API client that is also a class, and it has the implementation here. And this code fully available in GitHub repository that is free to download for everyone. Okay, let's go directly to explore how it all works. So I'm gonna just start that MCP server here by clicking that start button. And we have the output going in here, and you see that it's very lightweight and it starts very fast at this point. And you see that there is that logo, FastMCP 2.0. And it says to us that it started. And this is the output from the process. It has no UI, so we're looking at the logs, right? Okay, now let's go here to our chat. And you see that I have a completely new chat here. There's nothing in here. So what may happen to you when you start working with the MCP server very first time is that two things. First off, due to changes that happen to Visual Studio Code all the time, they're totally outside of my influence of context of this presentation whatsoever. There may be limitations for some of the models in this list to work with the local MCP server. I haven't figured out specifically where those settings are. I discovered that if I use the auto mode, I have no control on that mode, which model I use. So some of my requests, they are routed to a model that for whatever reason may not have access to this locally running MCP server. I know that Claude Sonnet 4.5 does have it. So for the reason of this tonight presentation, I will be using the Sonnet, but I also tested it with different models and most of them work. That's number one. Number two, When you run it very first time, Copilot will ask for your permission to actually use it, right? In my case, we may not necessarily see that because I already gave Copilot permission to work with this MCP server in this entire workspace. So it's not session-based. It may not ask me for anything. It doesn't mean that it will not ask you. I won't be able to show you how it looks immediately, but regardless, it's really simple to work with. Once you see that prompt right here in the chat window, it asks you to allow or not allow. And the last note before we start is that remember our workflow. So we always start from the connection, right? From authenticating with Microsoft Fabric. Now, what it means is that you absolutely must have an account with Microsoft Fabric. You must have access to the Microsoft Fabric. You must have access to at least one workspace. And this, how to achieve all that, this requirement for working with the Microsoft Fabric, it's totally outside of this presentation, so we cannot talk about it today. I mean, we can touch a little bit in the Q&A time, but not much. So it's outside. But I do hope if you guys want just to increase my confidence, if you show me hands who has access to Microsoft Fabric. No hands. Yeah, one hand. Two. Yeah, a few people. It's not a lot, which is totally fine. But for those who doesn't have access at this point and still want to try and use that thing in the future, just make sure that you acquire at least the trial license for Microsoft Fabric before you start working with this project, because this essentially is you working remotely with Microsoft Fabric, nothing else. So if you don't have Fabric, you don't need that project at all. Sounds good. All right. So what I'm going to do is I showed you before. You may not know that, but see how the MCP server is called Fabric? That is a name that is familiar, should be familiar to the GitHub Copilot from this configuration. We will see. I'm asking to show the workspaces that I can work with. We're running that. So Copilot is doing its magic, right? And it's saying, hey, I'm running the list workspace. So it did figure out very quickly that without any additional prompt from my side, that when I talk to Fabric, it has to use this MCP tool. I could have, if it doesn't happen to you, very first time when you try it, what you can do is you can specifically instruct it to use Fabric MCP server. We don't need to do this. Now, what didn't happen at this point is authentication. And I really want to show you that how to achieve it, because see, MCP server does not MCP server does not have the user UI. So the only way to communicate information to you is to look at the output here, right? Just for the for that specific reason, what I did, because I know the reason why I wasn't asked to enter my login and password to connect to Fabric, because I connected before, and at this point my credentials are cached in our authentication provider. And authentication provider refreshes the token automatically after the very first login. So you don't need to do this every single time. It's a convenience feature, but also it may hide the fact that you need to authenticate very first time. So for that particular reason, what I did is this is not needed for the actual workflow, but I'll show you that we have a tool here that's called the sign out. So what I'm going to do is I will ask reset session with Fabric. Well, what we can do is this, right? So, when you're in the chat and you see that the Copilot executed an external tool, in this case, our tool sign out, you can always see what was going on there, right? And you could see that we received that sign out successfully. Now it was a deviation a little bit, but let me just repeat the same very first call that I started from. And what happens here is this: you will see in the log that authentication required, right? Now because we're in VS Studio Code, we have to use the device login flow, how it's designed. So I need to copy that URL. And I will switch to my browser, which one? This one. I will just bring the browser over here to that screen to show you. Oh, let me just start a new window right here. There's no need. Okay. So I'm in device login, right? And you remember that we see that code right here. And we want to enter it here. And then you have your standard. Now, take a note that we are logging into the Power BI gateway. That's how Fabric is called from inside Microsoft Azure ecosystem. Now, my phone asks me to enter the code. You know that drill. If you work in Microsoft ecosystem, it happens all the time. Everywhere you want to connect, it needs that. Now it's just the verifications. Yes, that's us, and we're connecting to Fabric specifically. Done. Okay. Now see what happened here. Again, authentication successful. And from this point, my session with the Copilot continues. And now we have the list of the workspaces that I can work with. Now, I know that I will want to use this workspace for this demo. Whatever workspaces you may have access to, you will see them all here because it's a user security context. Next, in our infrastructure, right, in our workflow, what do? We discover our data stores. Okay. Just a technicality, the unified store discovery experience is not yet implemented on this project. It's a work in progress, but I can work with the lake houses. So I ask Copilot to show me lake houses in this workspace. Let me know if you see my screen fine, or do you want to increase the font here? Oh,
I think for me, I see it's fine. I see a lot of thumbs up. I think we are good.
okay. Sounds good. So I have two lake houses at this point that are in my security context. I will work with this particular sales lake house, and I will ask Copilot to show me well, I'm using a jargon language, right? I'm a qualified user. I'm a code first data engineer or analyst, so I understand the concept of tables. So I don't need to use the more, civilian language for that. So I can be more precise. But we can actually try and see if the civilian language that doesn't operate with the specific terms can work with here, because that's exactly what LLM is for. But just so we can progress to the interesting part, right? Show me what tables I have in sales lakehouse, right? The good thing already that I don't need to exactly specify that this is a lakehouse. And you see that the tools are properly selected for this, and they are running inside. And we see a lot of stuff in here, right? So first of all, we see that apparently we have a bronze scheme and we have 10 tables in there, and we have a silver scheme and we have uh, uh, materialized like views. They're not really tables, but from SQL endpoint point of view, they are all the same, right? Now, whoever attended SQL Saturday, I see the pointers here, so you may remember, but you may not have been at my session. But we explored the materialized lake views there specifically, and this is a similar database that I am showing you today. Now I'm done, right? Remember our workflow? I discovered workspaces. I discovered my analytical stores. Then I discovered data in a specific analytical store. Now, what's the last step that I'm here for, right? I want to do the custom queries. That's what I'm here for, nothing else. Okay, let me do this. Tell me what data I have in bronze schema. I mean, we have the table names, but do we really understand what columns are there or not? We don't, right? And we don't really need to start from exploring specific stuff. And we'll let Copilot to do this work, and see what happens here is that the Copilot will actually execute a lot of queries here, and some of them they may return errors for whatever reason. But that's not the point, because we are still leaving all these details. Actually, it was just one call here. We can examine that because we can always open this, right? And we can have bronze product and error calling this tool because serializing. It's a data issue, right? So what I can do is, because I honestly I didn't specifically run this prompt before. That's the very first time I see that error. But that's important that we understand that this is a work in progress code, and it's open source and it's not maintained. Well, so far I'm the only one who is working on it. But if anyone from the audience is interested to contribute, just feel free to connect and join the project if you like that kind of stuff. But nonetheless, what we get as a answer here is that we have some descriptions, right? And we see that we have customer and shipping addresses with additional descriptions here. It may give us an idea what's going on in here, right? So we ask the next question. For example, I want to see some statistics about customers in bronze schema. So Copilot makes a reasonable suggestion that we need to look at that database, at that specific table that holds the customer, and it generates a number of queries for us. And we can examine all of them. We can just open each of those for examination. But essentially, what we see is that we have the total of 147 customers, and we have unique customer companies associated, sales people, and the date range from here to there, and some more. Like we even have demographics, and we have the top sales people, whatever. So we don't specify what statistics we want to see. So that's totally a work of the Copilot at this point. And similar stuff we can do around any other table. And that's all done by that simple MCP server that allows Copilot to use its power of generating the SQL queries from human language and run it against the data in the user context in Microsoft Fabric. Just so we understand what's going on here, we can see it. So Copilot came up with the idea that we want to select a count of all the records as total customers that it showed us, right? And then there was that output, and there was the row count and the results of this, and then it was interpreted here in the human language for us to read. This is a simple scenario, right? So essentially, my demo is done at this point. I explained to you what MCP server is. I explained to you how it's developed, what technology platform is being used, what tools are being used to set up all this. And I showed you that it works in the Copilot chat. Similarly, it can be connected to different MCP host applications, for example, the Cloud Desktop. And then we can talk to data like this. But I just want to emphasize one thing, that this is really simple use case, because say if you're a data engineer, you wouldn't do this stuff. You may want to do this stuff initially when you start working with data and you understand what's going on in here. But basically, what you want to do is you want to generate stuff, right? So what the next level of complexity here is when we introduce a use case for the Copilot. Say, I want to generate a view for analytical purpose on top of these tables in bronze layers that can be useful to target my next marketing campaign against some products, right? So I want to answer the questions, for example, like which products out of the entire list in my company I want to run my next marketing campaign for. And to support that, I want to generate a view, right? So we don't have enough time right now to explore that scenario, unless you want to stay longer. But that is what this tool will be really useful for. And at this point, that's all I wanted to show you right now. So this is a quick introduction into this technology. And back to Michael.
Yes, thanks. And we've got a question for you.
Yep.
So Dipankar has got a question about the MCP, the FastMCP. I'll read this question exactly as he has it. Is the FastMCP an add-on to VS Code?
No, it's a library. It's a library for Python. It's installed really easy automatically. If you download that code and go through the instruction for the Python, well, if you want to install it standalone, I'll show you. Let me show you the website. here. I'm sharing the screen at this point. All right, so this is a project on GitHub. It's called FastMCP, and that's its logo and stuff. And if you just go through it, there's a getting started documentation, and there's a lot of stuff. But essentially, you need to pip install FastMCP. Then you need to reference from FastMCP inside your code. Import FastMCP, instantiate your MCP server, and run it. It's a library. Did I answer the question?
I saw him do it.
Yes. Yes. Thanks, Alex. Yeah. Am I allowed to ask a question? Another question?
Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, Alex, it's a very good presentation. One thing I'm trying to understand, I'm sure MCP has more broader uses than the example you have shown. The reason I'm saying is you can achieve the very same thing by using Fabric Copilot or creating Fabric agent inside Fabric itself. So can you a little bit give us more information or kind of more details that where and when actually you should use the MCP server? So I'm just trying to figure that out. I know at the very beginning you shared there is because you can connect many different tools because this is just a protocol, right? But I'm talking about the example and use cases of it. Where actually it may, because as you know, many cases there is always Copilot built by Microsoft. You can ask the question, how many tables I have, what's the value, and max, mean, or whatever query you can ask Copilot. Still, they're gonna give you that result even without using this MCP server. So if you can give a little more about the use case when actually you should use the MCP.
Right. Well, you're correct that many of these parlor tricks, I would say, like asking about tables and data and simple generating queries, they can be achieved inside Microsoft Fabric. Now, imagine that you're not inside the Microsoft Fabric, that you're working outside. In that case, you don't have access because only Copilot inside Microsoft Fabric is only available through Microsoft Fabric user interface, in-browser user interface. If you're using external tools, for example, in my case, I'm using the VS Code. Some other people may be using some other tools because there are a lot of different tools working that allow you to do code-first development that are not as rich as, well, the opposite. Microsoft Fabric user interface for development is not very rich at this point, right? So you may want to use a different environment for your engineering tasks. That's one main scenario. Asking about statistics, it's minor scenario. I totally agree. Now, the secondary scenario, which may be more important, is the automation. What that means is, for example, you need to do some operation inside Microsoft Fabric from the external tool that is not interactive for humans. In such scenario, for example, you have some automated process that may need to run queries, may need to extract data, may need to do stuff with some objects in Microsoft Fabric. In that case, you can use MCP server and you can create the instruction for this automation process without using the specific programming language, but just using the human language. So that's another use case scenario. And one more use case scenario is a complex development of the data projects. It's a developer targeting tool. By all means, it's not for business analysts, because unlikely that they will be using the VS Code as their main working environment. So the main scenario here is advanced development in which you need to have a very specific support from LLMs, from different LLMs that are not available at this point in Microsoft Fabric AI. They're just not. You have no access to Microsoft Fabric AI. There's a little bit a sideline scenario for that as well. For example, in Microsoft Fabric, to use the AI Copilot, you need to actually provision, enable its usage, and it will be consuming Microsoft Fabric capacity. Now, you can use a different capacity in Fabric that will be designated for the AI operations only, for the Copilot only exclusively. But if you compare the cost of using the Copilot through Microsoft Fabric capacity versus using the alternative LLM hosting, it may be very different. In this scenario, when you need to support your engineering team with the Copilot experience, it may be prudent to have the alternative hosting of the LLM models. For example, with the GitHub Copilot, it's relatively cheap, and you don't need to provision any infrastructure for that. You don't need to manage capacities. You don't need to control how Fabric works with the Copilot at all, because each developer individually uses their own subscription for the Copilot. In that case, you will be using the power of external LLM hosting to support very powerful way of developing data engineering artifacts for Fabric. So these are the scenarios that so far I came up with while I've been working on this project.
Thank you so much, Alex. Do you think also, like, for example, in this same VS Code project, and you would like to add some other sources, maybe the data coming from Snowflake or any other sources, and then you're going to ask the very similar question irrespective of data from Snowflake or Fabric Lakehouse, and you still should be able to do it, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Well, I want to mention here is that I'm still sharing the screen, right? So I want to mention that the suggested way to achieve that is to have separate MCP servers for separate data sources. You don't want to make there is absolutely no issue running multiple MCP servers at the same time. And we know that it's relatively easy to do. Let me just share the screen again. Back to my Visual Studio Code, I believe. Here, right? So when I have a session with my Copilot, I can configure all the tools that I want to use, and I have multiple MCP servers that I can use. So if I had, say, a Snowflake MCP server right here, I would have enabled that, and I would have configured in my MCP JSON file as a separate MCP server. If it's in the same workspace, I would have had it here. With the different keyword, I would call it snowflake or flake or whatever, snowball, snowman, however I want it. And the Copilot will pick up that name automatically from the context and will know to use the tool from another MCP server in the same session. So it's really easy to combine multiple different MCP servers.
No, thanks a lot.
I think I've got one more question. So are you able to see the chat, or I can read it? So it's just
let me open. Yes, I can open the some see the chats.
I think it's like 2 or 3 questions in one.
Right.
We might want to read it just for those who might be watching the recording too. As you answer, you might want to mention which part you're answering.
So we answered question from Diponker about
So you've done that one.
right.
This is recent. It's by Darling.
For Fabric workloads like deep learning model training or others, when would companies need on-prem GPUs over cloud? What self-hosted options mimic Fabric's lakehouse features like Spark in those cases? This is well, it's outside of the scope of the session, I must say, but I don't have first-hand experience with running that locally, but I do know that if you want to use a specific set of tools for your machine learning workloads, most likely you will opt with the MLOps. But if you're not using cloud, that's very unfortunate because you will need to implement a quite sophisticated infrastructure on premises, which may completely get it not worse to even doing that unless you have a really good justification for the cost that will incur to have that. Because there is no limitation literally for using the powerful GPUs on cloud, because, for example, Azure provides that type of hosting. You can select when you instantiate the virtual machine, you can specifically select if you want to use, there's a class of virtual machines on cloud that will come equipped with the particular GPU that you will be able to dedicate to yourself. Of course, it costs money. Most likely it will cost less on cloud than on premises, because there's the overhead of the infrastructure that on cloud it's shared across all the customers, but on premise it will be exclusively whoever owns that infrastructure, all theirs. The second part, what self-hosted options mimic Fabric Lakehouse? Obviously, it's the Spark cluster, so you can deploy it locally. It's the open source. You cannot deploy native execution engine that Microsoft optimized for Fabric specifically, because it's Microsoft code that only exists in Fabric. But you can deploy standard open source Spark cluster on premises or in your data center if you wish, and you can do similar stuff like running notebooks in there. Would I do this? Well, Fabric is so easy to use. I wouldn't want to bother trying to re-implement the Spark cluster on premises if it was me. But I don't know the circumstances, so it may be useful in some scenarios, but I wouldn't be suggesting this to anyone at this point. It's kind of very old school already. I don't know if I answered, but that's my personal opinion only. Feel free to argue or feel free to expose your own opinion on that.
I think it thumbs up, so maybe he's happy with your answer. I think Dipanka has a question.
Yeah, I just would like to, not more question. I would like to add to the very fast question. The person asked very fast part of the question where installing GPU in on-prem. Some companies does it, even at our organization, they're doing it. I'm just sharing this for everyone, right? Why they do it. I had very similar opinion what Alex you mentioned. Why you're going to do it. But now I understand when I'm talking with our IT and data science team, the reason they're doing it is a backup plan. Think about organization, they'd like to try it. They would like to they would like to train their own LLM. So they're going to have a basic LLM and they're going to train with the data that exist at OMERS at our organization where me and Michael both work. And that's the reason they have everything on-prem. And they buy that all the server, GPU and so on, and they did everything themselves on-prem. I can see the two reasons. Number one, you need to know the company would like to learn end-to-end how things work. Number one. Number two is in case any disaster happen, you still have something on-prem, you can do it. I mean, the later one is very rare, but just have it.
Thanks.
Well, I don't disagree. If we need the ending phrase here, I don't disagree with this scenario. It's just not the one that I would personally choose. I have counter arguments.
You're looking at all the amount of work.
Oh yeah, a lot of work.
Well, believe me, I'm well familiar. I run a lab inside my personal office network, so I know what it takes to have many computers working orchestrated, managed. That's a lot of work. But I totally agree with what Dipankar said, is that there are circumstances when it's warranted, by all means.
I think, except Alexander, if you have anything you want to say, I can close with the two questions we ask everybody that will bring in. And I'm going to ask it together for you so that we don't take too much of your time beyond what you've given us, and you've been generous with your time. So I'll say it's two parts, but originally it's two questions. So I'll say part one is, how did you get into this entire data space? I know you've been in here for decades, but if you could just go as far back as, I don't know, maybe when you were not in data, maybe like high school or whatever, like tell us your journey and what made you stay and what makes you kind of even run your own consulting firm. So it's like you signed your life for this field, like this is the only thing you want to do. It's been nice to hear your journey. And secondly would be, what advice do you have for people who they are trying to, maybe their day job or the field they are in is not this aspect of data engineering, AI, and all of these, and they're trying to pivot, but their work is not letting them have that opportunity? How will you the learning materials and kind of make that shift to get the experience and practical knowledge that will make them be knowledgeable in this space? So more like your advice for people who want to become who you are, but their work right now does not involve, doing this or having anybody teaching them on this.
Right.
The question is clear.
I'll try to answer quickly. My journey so my professional journey is kind of long and boring, to be honest. And I tell you why, because if I started coding in 90s, in last century. So, I've been doing this for a long time. And at the time when I only started using the computers, at that time, there wasn't even the PC available to my disposal. I was working for an organization that had a mini mainframe. There was a class of computers, they called them mini mainframes or mini. Well, I don't know what's their other term. They were much cheaper and much more affordable. The one that I specifically had the chance to work was designed by the company Digital Equipment Corporation, DEC. It was known as DEC. At the time, it had a number 11, and it had 16-bit CPU, and it had 64 kilobytes of memory at the time. Yet, it was able to run in parallel 16 user sessions, each one building, compiling, and running calculation programs at the same time. So I don't know how it's possible compared to what we have right now. I have the i7 CPU 11th generation on my laptop, and then 32 gigabytes of memory, and I'm doing this to run PowerPoint. I'm using it, right? And if I was anything less, probably PowerPoint would complain or something like that, let alone all these advanced tools that we're using at this point right now. But yes, I progressed as a programmer first, because programming was the only available way to manipulate with the work with the computer. If you couldn't program, good luck. There is no computer to you. Go away. That's it. You can go to some specialized group of people who would write a program for you, but you would never know if the program they wrote is exactly what you wanted. So I had literally no chance. I had to learn how to program. I had a good start myself, because in school I was taught to do this properly, and I was a programmer, then software engineer for a long time before cloud. It was all on premises. It was all on private data centers inside companies, and I worked for different enterprises over time. The last step of my journey in corporate world was I finished in 2016 with the title of VP of engineering. It was a small company, but I started with the company as a startup. I helped it progress to the point when it became very profitable. I built the entire software stack and that company. It's a print house, web to print system with the online web platform that allows you to design your printing artifacts and then send them and receive the order in a very sophisticated thing, fully automated at the time. And it was my very first project that I did on Azure. The year was I started at 2011. It was very earlier. Azure was really, really different. I wouldn't say bad. It was different at the time. It was just not as sophisticated as today. And at some point, I realized that I'm kind of bored doing the same stuff all over again. So I want to switch gears. I want to work on something else. But it so happened that if I stay with the same company, there was very little chance that I would be doing different things, because business drives the demand. So business requirements, they stay the course, and I would need to stay the course as well. So I joined what was known as Object Sharp at the time. I was honored and lucky to be taken into that community. It was a community of freelance consultants, very smart people, extremely smart. I have never been in a company of people smarter than that. Not in my life, completely. Even when I visit Microsoft events and stay around people like, CTO of Azure, Mark Rusinovich, or people from the data practice, like a guy in a cube, right? Still, that smartness of the local Toronto consulting community, it still prevails. And I was just lucky, and I got into it, and that's it. And I've been working on that area for almost 9 years at this point. 9 years will be in a few weeks. And I was working on so many different projects that completely satisfied my tastes in everything. And I get to learn new stuff. I get to play with the cool toys, when they're announced. So that's what I like about it. At the same time, I get to help organizations and people to achieve their goals with the technology. That's cool. And the last question, right? The last question was my advice. Well, The technology sector is specific in only one way from any other industry or sector, if you wish, is that it changes so fast that to stay relevant, you have to learn every single day. If you don't, you're done tomorrow. You're not relevant anymore. Like there are exceptions in that situation because, COBOL as a language, very old, right? People who originally learned that like 30 years ago, they didn't need to learn anything else. They can still use that precise skill to continue, but with the help of Copilot, COBOL is gonna die very soon. So even those specific skills will need to be upgraded. Now, the important thing here is this, it's a habit. Now, I don't think Java is dying anytime soon. Java is in the core of 90% of financial services and software, so it's long-lived and it will continue to do so. And it's run by Oracle at this point, so it's inside the Oracle systems everywhere, and nothing's going to happen to Java. Not my stack, just historically, not because I was when basically I was getting into the corporate world, the Microsoft was much easier and it was more popular stack at the time. I started working with the .NET since the version 1.0, and it worked for me so far. But data is everywhere. Any application has to deal with data 100%. There's nothing else for application to do, only data in different forms, different tasks, anything, but only data is what applications do. So I've been building different data platforms for years using technologies like puzzle pieces, trying to piece them together, to build a complete picture. And when the Fabric was announced, it was a new world. So I jumped into it. It was not, as often happens with the new technologies, it was not as good 2 years ago as it is now. At this point, it's fully functional data platform that can practically do anything that you can imagine at this point, and more, because people behind Fabric, they're very creative and they fantasize, probably they dream during the night, and then in the morning they start building what they dreamt. I don't know how much creativity is chemically induced at this point. And this is intended to be a joke, of course. But what they're doing, this is really magic to a certain extent. So Fabric would be at this point my very favorite platform for data operations. So my advice is just very simple. You need to be curious. You need to be confident in that regardless of your education, regardless of your profession, regardless of your age, regardless of any other human-related factors, you can learn, and you can become someone who knows how to do that stuff. That's it. There is no limit here, literally. It's only a matter of personal endurance and personal decision to keep going and achieve what you want to achieve. It's my only advice at this point. Just don't stop learning. Be curious. That's it.
Oh, thanks. And that's a good way to end today's session. So thank you very, very much. It's a pleasure to have you. I know we will try to bring you next year because I know you've got like 2 other great topics. So this is me just giving the tips to people who are here to watch out. But thank you very much, and thank you to everyone. Our next session will be next year. So wish you happy holidays ahead and happy new year ahead. And thank you for everyone who has been part of today. See you next year. And thanks, Alexander, for the very wonderful session, the eye-opening, the mind-expanding talks and illustration. I'm going to use FastMCP for many other things I've been thinking of, not just Fabric. So thank you very much. And also for the advice. And your journey is it's not boring. Very, to me, it's quite it shows how one can follow one's passion and keep doing amazing things just because you're doing what you enjoy. Even though the landscape changes, you still keep finding joy in what you do. So me, that's motivating. That's the right word I'm looking for. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Alexander. And I'm going to end the session now. The meeting's recording will be available sometime this week on the YouTube. We'll send the link on the meetup group. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Happy holidays.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. Bye.